Is this thing on? Is this thing on? How you guys doing? Everybody's still here? New chairs? Who's got the best lawn chair? I think, dude, you have got the best. Oh, nice. Easy, easy. We got a hammock chair. Anybody bought the hammock chair from Costco where you kind of lean back and watch UFOs? It's like $35 at Costco. Go get yourself a squatching hammock chair. I should have brought some here and sold them to you. Next year, maybe. All right, before we introduce our next guest here, I want to talk to you about the Bigfoot trivia questions coming to you. I just consulted with Grok, and she behaved herself. So we have some Bigfoot trivia questions here. Again, historic dirt from the Sierra camp. I don't know too many people that have been to the Sierra camp. Talking about the Barry Moorhead tapes, Voices in the Wilderness. It's kind of a big deal to Bigfooters, and we have some archaeological evidence here. The last of the shelter burnt down. So for some Sierra camp dirt, my first question to you is, there's many names for Bigfoot. One of these names comes from Siberia. What is the name from Siberia for Sasquatch? Anybody know? Oh, there he goes. Okay, big guy, got it. All right, here we go. Here's some fresh dirt for you.
Was that right?
Yeah, of course he was right. You got it right. Almas was the answer. Almas, I believe. Simeon, would that also be in Russia? Is that the Almas? Yeah, okay. Gotcha. Almasty, okay. All right, when Sasquatch walks on, let's go back to Bluff Creek. When you see Patty in the 1967 footage, I think it's the #2 most viewed footage compared to the JFK assassination, the Zapruder footage. Zapruder, is that how you say it? The PG film. And so as Patty's walking along the Sandy Bar, and Roger and Bob are there filming everything. MK knows a thing or two about this footage. And you better not answer this question, MK. As Patty is walking along, she does something with her feet. She swings them in front of the other foot in a line, right? Because that's the trademark identification of a legit Sasquatch track, is a tightrope. But I'm not going to call it a tightrope. If you were a nerd and you knew something about this, what would you call throwing your foot in front of the other one? First one to raise their hand, who was it? No? Anybody? Scientific term for throwing your foot in a tightrope fashion. First one to raise their hand. I'll give you a hint. Compliant. Who said that? Over there. Okay, nice. In the Mary Poppins tent. Can someone give her the dirt? You want to come up here, Mary? Go ahead. Great. Give her a round of applause. Nice work. Compliant gait. All right. Barefooted. You got it. We'll give you more than dirt tomorrow. I promise. Boy, it is gusty up here, but it feels so good. Stand over here. All right, you see him waiting in the wings here with bated breath. A friend of ours, one of the stars of a great many documentaries and a hit YouTube channel. You can find him almost anywhere with his dog Astro, a good little friend of his. Our first and next guest here is Dr. Simeon Hein, author of Dark Matter Monsters, Black Swan Ghost, Opening Minds, and a hell of a guitar player. Maybe you can find him strumming some tunes over in the corner there. Dr. Simeon Hein is director of the Mount Baldy Institute, a research and teaching company, which he founded in '97 to give people the opportunity to learn resonant viewing. Sounds like remote viewing, but it isn't. Dr. Simeon Hein has taught statistics at the university undergrad, has a PhD in sociology, an emphasis on how humans interact with technology. He started his research and teaching at a company at Mount Baldy Institute in '96 to give people the opportunity to learn resonant viewing, a type of intuitive training that taps into our creative, unconscious intelligence. He studies crop circles and takes people to the crop circles for tours. He's written several books, including Opening Minds, A Journey of Extraordinary Encounters, Crop Circles and Resonance Planetary Intelligence, 101 Easy Steps to Energy, Well-Being, and Natural Insight, and Black Swan Ghost, newly revised Black Swan Ghost, as sociologist encounters witnesses to unexplained aerial craft and their occupants, and the other elements of the multiverse. With his most recent book, Dark Matter Monsters, Cryptids, Ball Lightning, and the Science of the Secret Universe. He's recently featured on the History Channel show In Search of Season 2, Episode 7 by Zach Quinta, and the topics of UFO and crop circles. His research is also showcased in a new documentary, A Flash of Beauty, Paranormal Bigfoot. Dr. Simeon Hein is here to answer your questions. So everybody give a big warm of applause to Dr. Simeon Hein.
Thanks, Toads.
Well, thanks a lot, Toads. Appreciate it. Thanks for being here today. This is really a first time I've been out to Oakridge here. It's a beautiful location, and this is a great festival here. We got great temperatures now, so this is pretty cool. So I'd like to talk to you right now about how I got involved in some of these areas and why I think there is a larger scientific paradigm that's really been suppressed for decades. And it contains a lot of these different topics which we're hearing more and more of in the media. And I think what we see coming here is a sort of tidal wave of paranormal, have been called paranormal phenomena, making their way into mainstream science one way or another. And we're all kind of at the right place at the right time in history to see this happening. I think it's very exciting. So in this hour-long presentation, I'm going to talk about how I got involved in these areas, remote viewing, crop circles, the weird electromagnetic anomalies and orbs and things around crop circles. And then tomorrow we'll do part 2 where we'll get into more of dark matter, electromagnetics, and how that I think it connects to cryptids and Bigfoot and so forth, and kind of show why I think we're dealing with this larger area that for some reason science has wanted to ignore. I don't know why exactly this has been going on, but I mean, this lecture could be called Modern Science, What Went Wrong? Because folks like you and myself, we're dealing with people that have experienced these phenomena. You've experienced it yourself. And yet there's this like iron wall back into mainstream science that wants to marginalize it and keep it in the closet and not really subject it to open public scrutiny. At the same time, if you look at a lot of the information that's coming out of Congress right now in these UFO hearings, it's pretty clear there's been a lot of interest from our own government in these subjects. It's just been held in like these special access programs. So it's a kind of a strange situation where we're told on one hand that this is paranormal, supernatural, and yet the other hand we can see a lot of money flowing to it in black budget programs. So if you're confused, it's not your fault. It's the way our system has chosen to deal with these phenomena. Other countries are more open to this than we are, and if you've been paying attention to any podcast recently, you're probably aware that there's sort of like a technological arms race going on right now to see who can develop these technologies. I think once it comes into public discussion, it's a lot of these topics, including Bigfoot, including cryptids, all the stuff that's been held back. So let's look at how we get there, how I got involved. So the title of this talk is Hidden Events and the Resonance of Invisible Life Forms, Part 1. So what are hidden events? This is, you're wondering, how does this connect to sociology? Because that's my training is as a statistics teacher, WSU, not too far from here, Pullman, Washington, a number of decades ago. Hidden events are things that people experience that they don't talk about in public because they're afraid of ridicule, ostracism, and being, marginalized and being seen in a negative light by their friends, family, or bosses or colleagues. And so these are things that can go on for quite a while that we don't talk about, but they're kind of in the shadows. And a perfect example of this in history are meteorites. Meteorites were banned by the French Academy of Sciences in the late 1700s because they decided they couldn't exist. It was impossible. And Aristotle had said that there was no motion beyond the moon, the superlunary area, and they just ruled that these had to be hoaxes, that meteorites were peasant folklore. Does that sound familiar? Peasant folklore, and they decided that all these stones that people had seen fall from the sky were actually coming from volcanoes. Either volcanoes or lightning strikes were hitting the ground and throwing rocks up in the air. So all the meteorites throughout Europe, and other countries followed suit in Europe, threw all their meteorites away. From what I read, there's only one left. It was too big to move because they decided it was a hoax. Until there was a huge meteor shower in Eagle, France in 1804, and a physicist named Chladni and his friend Alfred Baptiste Biot from France went out like Sherlock Holmes investigators were walking around the countryside, and they saw this elliptical pattern of thousands of fragments of meteorites, which proved they had come down at a certain angle, and all of a sudden it went from being peasant folklore to like, this is obvious that there are things falling from the sky. So even something that would seemingly be as obvious as meteorites can be, extremely difficult to discuss at times if formal science takes the view that they don't exist, all of a sudden becomes controversial. So it's not just subjects like we're interested here, like Bigfoot and cryptids and unexplained aerial phenomena, as they're called now. This could happen to any subject that we now consider to be self-evident. Even things like electromagnetism was at one time considered really strange and paranormal because you can't see radio waves with your eyes, even though Maxwell's equations suggested that there are things like radio waves. So what we're dealing with, from my view, is still, at this moment in time, today, we're dealing with hidden events. As you know, you've either experienced this or you know people who've experienced this, people who've encountered Bigfoot, other types of creatures we don't even have names for, but it doesn't quite make it into the public realm of discussion without a considerable amount of skepticism and doubt and harassment of the witnesses and the ad hominem attacks. It's not treated like data the same way it would be from more commonly accepted topics like quantum computing or other science topics that are, hot at the moment, that are not controversial. These are something about this type of topic that engenders a lot of ridicule from the mainstream aspects of society, from other people that were around, and from government disinformation campaigns that are designed to ridicule these topics, as we've seen with UFOs for decades, so that they stay hidden. So there are different agendas here. Now, the main point here is it's not just the information that matters here, it's our willingness and the willingness of other organizations in our society to look at the information, right? Not just the information itself, because people always say, where's the proof? It's not just the proof, it's actually an open attitude of actually wanting to see evidence and look at it objectively instead of just making fun of it like we've seen happen for decades. So my first experience with any of these subjects started in the 1970s. My mom was a bird watcher, she took me and her, we went to the Everglades in Florida, and my brother and dad stayed behind. And we were out there with her really good quality binoculars. She was a really good bird watcher. I had binoculars, she had binoculars. And I look up and all of a sudden I see a huge object overhead. I thought it was the moon. I'm only like 12. So it looked like a huge green moon. And I said, Mom, what is that? And I said, look at the green moon. I can remember it like it was yesterday. Well, the moon was over there in that direction on the horizon. So she looked over there, kept bird watching. I said, no, Mom, look over there. She said, well, the moon's over there. We both looked up. She said, Sim, it's a UFO. And we both had binoculars, and it went from looking really amorphous with binoculars to looking really structured all of a sudden. And I can tell you, even to this day, it did not feel like it belonged here. It really felt alien. I mean, it felt strange. It had a strange vibe. I could tell this as just a young person. It had a weird scientific focused feeling to it. And then it immediately started moving into a cloud very rapidly. We went off, as the National Park Service had then, probably still has, these ranger talks at night in the amphitheater, and there happened to be a blackout for some strange reason. And the ranger said, did anybody see anything interesting today? Raise your hand. So my mom raises her hand. She says, we saw a UFO. And the ranger says, oh, did anybody else see anything today? Totally glossed over. And the people sitting next to us had seen it also. So my mom's a little ticked off. The presentation didn't last very long because there's no electricity, so there's no slideshow. So she goes up at the end and said, we really did see a UFO. Look, there's a blackout. And the ranger said, well, there are blackouts all the time in the Everglades. And so that was my first experience with some sort of mini government cover-up, because we had both seen this thing. My mom had said it was a UFO, and here was someone of authority, a position of authority in national park, and she didn't want to deal with it, okay? So that kind of got my interest going at a very young age. I really didn't pursue the topic very much, and years later, I mean, I read a couple books here and there, John Keel, Mothman Prophecies. Somewhere along the line, I came across Timothy Good's book about Top Secret at the University of Arizona bookstore. That book came out in '87. Years later, I'm at WSU. I'm just pursuing an ordinary graduate degree, statistics, research methods, and I come across this topic of fractal geometry. Does anybody heard of fractals before? These are self-similar objects that look like the way reality really looks, like trees and mountain ranges and streams and rivers and your bronchial structure, things that look self-similar. The closer you look, the more detail you see. And as you zoom out, they kind of look the same. And this really challenged the whole linear idea that I was learning in statistics and research methods. And the more I studied fractals, I saw that this is another mathematical way to look at reality, to look at the complexity of something that never resolves to a line. It's completely different from the math we learned in school. The closer you look at a fractal, the more detail you see. It never turns into a completely straight or flat surface, which means that fractals are technically objects between dimensions. Objects between dimensions. And it's how our body is built, the bronchial system, arteries, and so forth. And this is how nature gets the maximum amount of volume in a finite surface, like our bodies. So fractals look very important. And the more I looked into it, you could find that fractals are on a time scale too, like if you look at line noise in telephone lines, as Benoit Mandelbrot, the person that kind of created the name fractal, working for IBM, discovered that no matter what scale you look at, from 1 year to 1 second to 1 hour, you see the same sort of pattern in line noise. The length of something is dependent on how big your ruler is. As your ruler gets smaller, length becomes infinite because you're measuring smaller and smaller spaces, like this coastline of England example shows us. And there's another name for this, it's called flicker noise, and this is actually very important in the study of avalanches, because as you know, avalanches don't just start from a loud sound. they start from a sound that's at the right frequency to trigger all of those particles of snow to start rolling downhill. And so flicker noise shows us, it's a type of fractal pattern, that what matters in a system isn't just volume and amplitude, it's frequency and resonance. And systems where all the particles are connected often display the so-called 1/f spectra. Can you see anything on this screen here? You're not, guys, tubes. We're not getting anything here. Sorry about that, guys. 1 second. You haven't been seeing my screen. I'm really sorry. Let me.
What's happening, Simeon?
Oh, we're not getting. Oh, we have a screen now. Okay. Thank you.
Full screen. See if you can make it bigger.
Okay, we're gonna drag it over. Is this a little bigger?
There you go.
Yes. That is the wrong. Sorry. I mean, technical difficulties here. How about that?
There you go.
Okay. So, sorry. We're talking about fractals, things that nature looks like, how nature really works. So this started to lead me in graduate school to the idea that science may be missing something really big. And this is before I knew that Grover Krantz was upstairs in the anthropology department 1 floor up, okay? I didn't know about Grover Krantz. I didn't know about Bigfoot in eastern Washington back then, even though Grover Krantz and the crew had the footprints and were taking casts and the Blue Mountain tribe of creatures out there was known about. I just had the feeling that something really big could be missing from modern science. And it was from the study of fractals. It wasn't from any particular subject. So my mind was open to the idea that maybe there was something that our modern science hadn't looked at because it was not looking at the right type of analysis, mathematical analysis. It was making everything linear and averaged out because that's what modern statistics does. But these fractals turned out to be very important. This is something called the Sierpinski gasket, which is this triangle. You can see it's self-similar. The smaller you look, the more little triangles you see. This is the basis of certain processes in modern physics. And then my favorite of all, the Koch snowflake. This sort of start with a triangle, turns into the Star of David shape. And then if you keep iterating, you can see what happens. It becomes this snowflake-like shape. Right? And we'll find out in a moment why this shape is so important. So these were some of the shapes I was looking at, and you could start analyzing things in the real world with these shapes. By the way, these fractals became the basis of JPEG images, which all of you see every day because it allows you to transmit a smaller amount of signal. Remember when we used telephone lines to transmit our computer information in the early days? There wasn't a lot of bandwidth there, so you had to compress the information. So it has a practical application to satellite communication. You can use an algorithm instead. But what this suggested to me, why you're thinking, why does this matter? That we were living in a type of flatland. In other words, the educational system that you and I were part of growing up from kindergarten, as far as you went in school, taught us a certain view of the world that may be overly flattened. It may be excluding information, excluding data that looks messy, that looks fractal-like, because it's not easy to process. In the early days, 100 years ago, fractals were called mathematical monsters, okay? Because you could never reduce them to a line, or they're objects between dimensions, like some of the phenomena. So, a number of years later, when I heard about this idea of remote viewing on my local community radio station, I was open to the idea maybe this was the type of phenomena, telepathic communication, psychic functioning. Maybe this was something that was one of the topics that science had missed that was really more based on fractal patterns or something. So I wasn't a true believer immediately. I was kind of an open-minded skeptic. And this is sort of, if any of you have been through any educational training, academics, you're kind of open but skeptical. It's not a bad way to be. But when I took the class, I found it really worked. I'm not sure I liked the idea that it worked. It was kind of shocking in a very strange way. Is that you could describe something that was hidden in a folder behind your back and draw it perfectly, like you can see in the screen here, the Washington Monument. And you don't know how you did it. And it only took like 10 minutes. And it was trainable. This particular, you can see the viewer's drawing on the right and the target picture on the left. And you've all heard about remote viewing and so forth. As Tobe mentioned, I call it resonant viewing. But it's really kind of a strange thing in some ways. A lot of people have had premonitions, right? You have a feeling someone's going to call and you pick up the phone and it's them, or you have a premonition about something that's going to happen. But this suggested to me there was a whole level of information that our conscious mind was not aware of, that was under the surface beneath our conscious mind information that was verifiable. And we teach this in groups. I've taught various groups over the years, smaller groups in Boulder and bigger groups in Japan. So here's what happens when you teach people in groups remote viewing. Over lunch and breaks, they share stories of things that they don't normally share with other people, like hidden events. And my students in Boulder, Colorado, over the years started sharing stories of their Bigfoot encounters in the Rockies. And this is how it links back to Bigfoot. I heard these stories for years, folks, and I really didn't think it was that significant because the late night radio shows that I listened to, Art Bell and others, had convinced me that this was either some sort of escaped gorilla or a very rare North American wood ape, like John Bindernagel or Overkrantz would have argued, like a relative Australopithecus blackie or something, right? You know the deal. So I thought, okay, maybe this is a very rare creature that exists somewhere in the Cascades of Washington and comes down to Oregon a little bit, but that it's pretty rare. So when these students told me these stories over the decades, it wasn't like a light bulb went off in my head immediately. It just was there, and the stories were kind of strange. There was one guy who had been camping up by Netherlands who told me he was totally alone in the campsite, no one else there, and all of a sudden the tent opens and he's pulled out at rocket speed in a sleeping bag. The G-forces were so strong he was trapped in the foot of the bag, and he's 6'4". And when he screamed, whatever was dragging him let go, he popped his head up and there was nothing there. There's no people saying, gotcha. It was a prank, it was hard to make sense of. There was another woman that told me that she was in north of Colorado Springs and she saw a Bigfoot in her mind's eye, up in her bedroom, out of nowhere, and then here's the loudest scream she ever heard in her life. And she runs down the stairs, and her housemate, looking out the French doors in the kitchen, saw exactly what she had seen in her mind's eye on their deck, a big 8-foot red-haired Sasquatch staring in the window. And it jumped down before she got down the stairs, but it was exactly what she had seen. And she had heard it in her mind. Or maybe she really heard it, we don't know. But that suggested to me that maybe there was a telepathic aspect to these escaped gorillas. And so you can see the picture got a little murkier because all of a sudden it didn't quite fit what I had heard on the Art Bell show very much from those particular experts. So a little more RV, it convinces you there are other things that are going on that you haven't been told about in grade school or high school. And it's like a gateway drug to other topics, because if RV is real and nobody told you that you have these innate psychic abilities, the next logical question is, what else didn't they tell you about? That's also real. And this takes years, as you know, in your mind's eye, in your processing of it. What else is real? Is it UFOs? Is it Sasquatch? I mean, how far does this go that reality is really different? I mean, really, really different than we were taught. And what we're doing all the time, which is what all the books about RV said, is you're basically molding reality to this consensus story that you've been taught by society. And there's a lot more going on in there. So if there's a lot more going on in there, what's going on that you're not seeing? Because the RV information, and you can read this in Ingo Swan's favorite book, The User Illusion by Danish science writer Tor Nordstranders, says that of all the information that's coming into your mind every second, you're only aware of about a fraction of a percent, maybe like 10,000th of a percent of all the information that's coming into your brain every second. A 10,000th of 1%, 16 bits out of 40 million. So that means you're seeing a ton more, but all that's registering here is what you expected to see, and the rest is all deleted by your unconscious mind. It says you don't need to see this, so you never even knew that you were deleting it. And you saw this in A Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed, right? In the first movie. That was one of the first Bigfoot movies I actually ever saw. That's how recent I am to the topic. And you had those psychological professionals at the end saying, and I'm sure some of you know people that have experienced this, that you will delete a Bigfoot encounter so quickly out of your mind's eye that you'll not even remember you had the encounter, right? That's what they're telling us. And this RV seems to suggest the same thing, that there's a lot more going on there. And you've all heard stories of people encountering cryptids who by the time they even got home, they forgot about it if it hadn't been for another friend in the car sitting behind and reminded them. So our minds are excellent deletion systems. This is, by the way, double blind. In case you think that the viewer is just reading the mind of the monitor, and we kind of work this way, monitor and viewer. This is double blind, and it's still, it's a drawing for an advertisement. It's still very accurate, so it can be done double blind. Anyway, as you all probably know, there was a military program in remote viewing since the 70s to develop psychic spies. And I was just impressed by the accuracy of it, not in every single session, but a lot of these sessions. If you want to read more about RV, you can read this excellent, this is an older book, Remote Viewers by Jim Schnabel. What I liked about the Jim Schnabel book is they mentioned working with Uri Geller, Hal Puthoff, and Russell Targ early on, before they got to Pat Price and Ingo Swann. But what was interesting was the description of the cryptids that showed up while they were working with Uri Geller in the homes of these researchers. Impossibly large birds and other strange things. It was an early version of the hitchhiker effect. I mean, I didn't even know what to call it back then when I read this book. But there were mini UFOs seen in Lawrence Livermore Lab while Uri was there. So this starts to suggest that we're working with another reality that is encapsulated within our reality. We couldn't quite, it's not a parallel reality. It's here, but you don't see it most of the time. It's kind of suggests. It's also Third Eye Spies is an excellent documentary by Lance Mungio, if you want to learn more about RV. In any case, time moves on, and studying RV led me to crop circles. How did this happen? Because it was a target at the Farsight Institute. Courtney Brown was our instructor back then. You've probably seen him, heard him online on the YouTube channel and so forth. And he gave us this crop circle to view. I didn't even know what a crop circle was in 1996. I mean, I had just graduated from graduate school. They don't talk about these things, at universities. A crop circle, what is that? So I felt this is my target, and I got this very interesting feelings from it and energy. I think, I have to go visit these things. I want my feedback. So I happened to meet someone named Ron Russell at a UFO conference in Denver, my first UFO conference. I thought maybe people would be wearing Vulcan ears or something, but it turned out to be a very serious conference with excellent witnesses. Dr. Roger Lear was there with the implant removal and stuff, and it was fascinating. People talking about time slips. You know about those time slips, right? visiting restaurants that don't really exist and things like this that disappear. Another really interesting topic for another day. But I did find someone that was leading crop circle tours, so I went over to England, and this was the first one I saw. 1997 by Silbury Hill, the largest earth mound, man-made earth mound in Europe, and it was the Coke snowflake, which had been the subject of my dissertation. So there was the Coke snowflake, same patterns. Something or someone had made this the size of a football field in a field in England, and there was this kind of cousin of it about a week later by Milk Hill. Well, here's what really interested me, folks, about the crop circles. First, there was this debate of were they man-made or were they alien-made or something else. They caused electromagnetic interference in our devices. You know, people's compasses would spin around. I'm not saying every single crop circle would do this, but enough of them did that you would see this. It would cause your compass to spin around. This happened by Silbury Hill. People would experience these time slips. In this case, Ron had told me he went into this crop circle, went out to get some film, and he felt like he had been gone for 45 minutes to an hour. He encountered people in old English garb speaking Chaucerian English, like older English, and he felt like he'd been gone a long time. When he came back, they said you were just gone 5 minutes. So it was kind of a time slip. We started to make some on our own. This is one we made in Hays, Kansas in 2002. We had permission to make a small one. All of the film came out looking like this. Something's really wrong. And this is a professional Nikon camera that never did this before and never did it again. Same sort of thing we had seen in the UK. So what we found is that even the ones we constructed, some of them would have these strange electrostatic effects. And then once we got to get to know some of the human circle makers, and there were teams over there making some of these really big ones, they told us that they would see orbs out there at 2 a.m. In some cases, the orbs were so scary they ran away. These 20-year-olds with huge boards ran out of the fields to get away from orbs that didn't seem to want them in the field. So the crop circle topic became really complex, and it introduced me to ball lightning orbs. I got to see ball lightning twice over there, once on the ground and once up in the air. So it went from remote viewing to crop circles to these weird electromagnetic effects. And then there were these sort of orbs that people recorded with their video cameras. This German tourist photographed this ball lightning or orb while we were on the hill right behind their Woodrow Hill waiting for him to join us, and this was over a field with a crop circle in it. It was a man-made one by Koch and Cairo, two German doctors that like to make, they pay the farmer and make this as a way of communicating with the crop circle intelligence. But here is an orb over it. And some of the effects that we saw around these crop circles were very strong. This was so-called Devil's Den by this Celtic dolmen, and we found my static electricity device completely discharged its batteries in a few seconds of having crossed the boundary there of the circle. And then let's see if we can get this to play. Do we have any volume there? We are not getting volume. What he's saying is we had 14 hours of battery life when we went in. This is his GPS. And the batteries are flat as a pancake. They're very hot. In other words, the crop circle shape or some energy around the crop circle caused the batteries to discharge really quickly. And this also affected someone else's camcorder at the same time. So these crop circles were definitely electromagnetically active. The question is, what about them would create battery draining effects? I was even told that this happened to professional film crews filming ones with the National Geographic Channel. They said it happened to the BBC with their professional Betacam, and it was so severe they had to call London for instructions how to reboot the camera. So this is like major scale EM interference effects of a pattern that in wheat. You would normally assume that wheat is inert, but here it is electrically active, even ones that are man-made. And this tour guest in 2006 described, we were in this circle and all of a sudden her camera started to malfunction. It stopped, the viewfinder stopped working. Now these devices will come back later, but sometimes it can take months. As if there's some sort of charge in there, or a plasmoid, or something like that, that is like long-lived and living inside these electronic devices. In other words, we're around another energy field. This engineer from Eugene at the university had his electronic compass on his wrist stop working for that information. This is what the one display looked like after being in a crop circle. So these are real effects. This is something that I didn't anticipate. And it even can cause the shapes of the pollen to form a spiral, like a vortex-like shape. There were even magnetic changes that you could measure in the fields. And I'm just mentioning all this because you're all familiar with that these effects happen around cryptids and Bigfoot too, right? So in this case, this man-made circle created this very strong magnetic pattern. And we're just talking about wheat here. There are no magnets buried in the field or anything. Because after doing some field work, we found the people that made this one and they didn't put any magnets in the field. So what this shows us is that shapes can create energy, okay? That's what this shows us, is my interpretation. You're welcome to have another interpretation which you can share. But it's not just crop circles that have these patterns. Life forms use these metamaterials, tiny structured materials smaller than the wavelength of light, to affect their environment, like the Morphos butterfly, which has blue wings, but it's not because of a blue dye, it's because it's modulating the frequency of light. In other words, the wings of the butterfly are acting like a waveguide. And if you could make a waveguide to change colors, you could probably make a waveguide to cloak, right? I mean, it would suggest that's possible, to bend light and do other things with it. And other creatures use these metamaterials to affect their environment, water or light or other anti-reflective properties in interesting ways. So it seemed that something about the crop circles, because they were based on field-like patterns in grids, were acting like liquid crystals or photonic crystals, bending the wavelengths of light. Now, I'm not saying all circles were made in this way, because we had witnesses to some things like the Tully saucer nests in the 1960s in Australia, where discs were seen landing, and these circles would appear in the reeds. Okay, so some of them are made by flying discs, UFOs. One witness I encountered, Louise Boves, who's no longer with us, from northern Idaho, described to me, and you can see this on the Black Swan Ghost website, just click on the videos, how she was up there picking huckleberries with her brother in Usk, Washington, in the Colville area, and a disc came over, and as it left, it made a whooshing sound over the meadow and flattened the meadow. Not, she said flat as a pancake, which to me sounds a lot like the types of things that the stories we heard about UFOs making crop circles. I mean, this did not make a crop circle, but it flattened the grass. And then subsequently, someone called the sheriff, the military came off, the area was cordoned off, and they were really ticked off because they couldn't get any huckleberries. It was cordoned off for at least 10 days. While she said the military were up there taking measurements and samples, Geiger counters. So we know that the UFOs and things are connected with these plant flattening properties. And orbs. This particular one in the UK went, by my measurements, like 200 miles an hour, so it's pretty fast, right? And here's one that looks like it was really made by something else, like a plasma or some weather phenomena, because it's the way that the grain has this radial pattern going outside. By Westbury in 2010. It doesn't look man-made at all. So we have these other types, and there has always been this theory by Terence Meaden and others that the circles were formed by ball lightning orbs plasma, which we'll talk about a little more tomorrow night. But I started to get this idea that maybe there was something about the crop circles that was invisible, that were creating these energetic effects. And that's what led me to start looking at dark matter and dark energy, because perhaps the crop circle was acting like a waveguide, something really symmetrical and spiral, vortex shape about the wheat. The wheat in this vortex pattern was interacting with a type of a hidden energy field, which gave it these special properties. So when I started looking into cold fusion, I found that some of the cold fusion, now called low energy nuclear reaction researchers, had come to this same conclusion, specifically Dr. Takeaki Matsumoto, a Japanese top nuclear researcher in Japan. He wrote this book, Steps to the Discovery of Electronuclear Collapse. And what he argued, as you can see there, is that if you looked under a very, fine-powered microscope, you would find miniature black holes in the materials that had undergone cold fusion, and that there was this interaction between atomic materials in Lehner reactions and dark matter. And he specifically said that it suggested that the whole universe was a fractal. So this wasn't just trees and bronchial structures and rivers. That the way the whole universe is structured, we see it here at a micro scale. In other words, the types of nuclear collapse that create black holes in the galaxies far away from gravity were being recreated in our reality from electromagnetic effects, which are 40 times stronger than gravity. And he felt that he was discovering this in his cold fusion experiments. Now, Matsumoto believed this was caused by micro ball lightning, micro orbs. And it was so controversial that he was banned from publishing in the cold fusion journals in the US. This was considered controversial, to argue that there were miniature black holes and ball lightning at a subatomic scale, that we didn't hear about him. He passed away, sadly, last year, but we had contact with him through Martin Fleisch Memorial Project, all his writings and works, and it's all being assembled into higher quality versions of this book and more material. But basically what we're learning is that a lot of people wrote to him from the United States, were corresponding with him, John Bockris, the world's leading electrochemist. Well, all these folks that were studying this cold fusion Lehner were discovering ball lightning and micro ball lightning in their laboratories, just like Takeaki Matsumoto was. But here's the kicker. They discovered another form of matter that's dark. And you can see a version of this right here. It's my bad dog Astro over there. In addition, if you look closely at this is the Shakhparanov generator. They used a Mobius strip. It's just a strip that's folded back on itself like we would do as kids with paper. So it kind of one side goes to the next. The Mobius strip, kind of a symbol for infinity or a phase singularity, kind of just keeps going around, MC Escher and so forth. It generated black ball lightning, dark ball lightning, which some argue could be around you and you don't even see it, okay? It's invisible a lot of the time. We just happen to capture it. It's like a miniature black hole right there. So you can see a picture of that right here. And then to top it off, Now this area of cold fusion LENR, there are so many scientists working on this in different parts of the world. They didn't communicate with each other until recently. So what we discovered is that there were Russian researchers in the former Soviet Union looking at this, and what they discovered is this multi-level toroidal coil could also make ball lightning in the lab. And the amazing thing about it is when you turned off the machinery, the ball lightning would last for 2 days in the same space. So you could take this hyperdimensional toroidal coil. These are coils within coils within coils. Kind of like a complex donut, a toroidal shape. If you turned off the machinery and took it away, you could still use a magnetometer to detect the ball lightning in the space. So this suggests that there are invisible types of energy and matter that could be generated in the lab, or could be generated by nature and you're not going to see it. It's the precursor for invisible life forms. Because if you have this in matter, it's really kind of logical to take that farther and say, well, are there life forms that are built around these patterns too that would get an advantage from cloaking or invisibility? And I think we know who we're talking about here, right? I mean, this is just one possibility. But what I'm attempting to show you here is the weird effects that we see around Bigfoot, the things that seem paranormal or strange that people say are in the woo. You know, this is the quantum woo versus the flesh and blood. Actually, the physics of it that comes out of decades of physics experiments in ways to generate alternative energy, free energy, and so forth, going back to Nikola Tesla, show us that the logical outcome is cloaking and invisibility from science. We haven't talked about it a lot in our society because it's the stuff of DOE programs, which I'll share with you a little bit tomorrow. But this is what really made me fall out of my chair. When they looked at this hyperdimensional donut shape, they concluded it fits Maxwell's equations of magnetism and electricity at right angles, but it goes inward in a closed pointing vector instead of an open pointing vector, which concentrates the energy more and more and more, all the way down to the 0 point field. So it's an alternative type of electromagnetics. You can see these rings around rings around rings, and it's based on the Koch snowflake. And these Russian researchers determined that our favorite fractal here, the Koch snowflake, is the most densely packed substance in the universe. If you create these toroidal donut-shaped rings within rings, you end up creating a technology that contacts the 0 point field. And that's why when you turn off the machines, it's still generating energy from the 0 point field, because it's based on a fractal inward pointing shape. Now this was the stuff of classified KGB programs, but as you're aware, the Soviet Union fell apart in the early 90s, as was destined to happen. And these scientists felt safe coming forward and telling us this. I think the scientists in our society, based on my discussions with them, don't feel this safe, and they're still hidden, but that won't last forever, obviously. But somehow the former Soviet Union released all these scientists because it fell apart, and they felt safe coming forward and showing us about fractal donut shapes creating invisible ball lightning and so forth. So this is really the essence of what I wanted to show you here in the first part of the lecture is, and thanks for sticking with this through all these ideas, I know this is a lot of material, is these fractal electromagnetic structures create a whole different type of energy field. And as people like Ken Shoulders, we'll talk about tomorrow a little bit, suggested life forms would be built around these fractal electromagnetic structures. which would be able to cloak, which would be able to teleport, which would be able to create invisibility and extreme levels of power. And I think that sounds like someone we know. Someone that we sometimes call Pete, if Ron Moorhead is in the room. So the point of what I'm attempting to show you folks, and thanks for listening to all of this, is that, by the way, Zverbelis, the Russian physicist that worked with this with a guy named Dubetsky, they both passed on now, who realized the Koch snowflake was the basis of ball lightning. They called these electromagnetic phantoms for real, like electromagnetic ghosts. And so I've obviously been wondering if you've seen, Flash of Beauty Paranormal Bigfoot or taking a look at dark matter monsters. Maybe this is what we're talking about with all these paranormal phenomena, at least in part, are fractal electromagnetic structures with a totally different set of principles than ordinary matter that we're used to interacting with, because the research suggests that these fractal patterns with their closed pointing vectors with smaller and smaller loops and rings of energy end up creating very interesting types of effects and technologies. And a lot of this has remained in black budget programs, so we don't hear about this a lot. But for some reason, because the Soviet Union fell apart, we got to hear about this. But maybe these electromagnetic phantoms are actually what phantoms are. Because when we look at the properties around a lot of paranormal phenomena, we see the same sort of phenomena being observed over and over again, right? Sudden quiet. It's not just around Bigfoot. We were just talking about this a few minutes ago at my table about frogs getting quiet when Biggie came around. You've heard all about this or experienced it. The forest got suddenly quiet. But it's around haunted sites. It's around ghost sites. It's around UFOs. It's around ball lightning. People report that it just becomes suddenly quiet. What else happens around Biggie and paranormal phenomena that comes completely out of electromagnetic fractals? Sudden cold. There's a researcher, General Pollack at the University of Washington. He wrote that book, The Fourth Phase of Water, and he talked about vortex cooling, because tornadoes and vortex shapes are the only structures in nature that we know about that suck up heat to maintain their structure, and they make the environment get colder. Now, how many of you have you heard, when you've heard stories about Biggie or ghost sites or even UFOs that became suddenly cold? It completely fits the vortex cooling effect. And it comes out of this sort of ether vortex idea, which came out of all this Russian research. And then another feature of these encounters, the smell of sulfur. How often have we heard around the smell of sulfur? Fire and brimstone, right? This goes back to the Bible. What is sulfur? It's oxygen-16 fusing into sulfur-32. And if we have Lehner cold fusion reactions going on, even at a microscale in these organisms, you're going to get the same effect in nature, which is why people often report, and I'm not saying this is the total explanation for why Biggie has such a strong smell sometimes, but you often get this sulfurous smell. It's an acidic smell. Witnesses I've talked to said it was blinding. It was sulfurous and acidic, and they were choking. You've heard this. That actually completely fits what we're talking about here, because that's what you get from fusion reactions when you get nucleonic transmutation, which is what Takeaki Matsumoto and Ken Shoulders and lots of different Russian researchers have been talking about. Nucleonic alchemy. We're talking about alchemy. It's really real. It's not just something from fiction from the Middle Ages. You can do it in these cold fusion Lehner reactors. There are whole tables that show us what elements come out of these reactions. And a big one is sulfur. So it's one possibility. Now, you could have another explanation. I'm not saying this is the only one, but I just find it very interesting that the book by Joshua Cutkin about the sulfur smells. the brimstone deceit. I mean, he started out as a Bigfoot researcher, but he became really curious why in all these different encounters, from UFOs to pugwudgies, to different types of creatures, to ghost encounters in Civil War battlefields, you get the smell of sulfur. And one reason it could really be happening is because you're actually dealing with life forms that have this nucleonic transmutation effect, which is why you're getting cooling. You're getting this sort of weird silence and that weird kind of creepy, fearful effect. And then the smell of sulfur. It actually suggests that what we're calling paranormal is actually another type of life within our reality. I'm not even going to parallel realities, folks. I love that topic, but I think this is actually in our reality, and it's hidden just like that picture of black ball lightning I showed you from the Shaparnov generator. And it's unfortunate, perhaps, that since World War II, our own federal government has so many classified research programs about this that they never talk about it. And the people who've worked in those programs don't talk about it very much either because they've signed NDAs. At least that's my theory about it. Because all the other scientists on the planet have come up with these ideas, and we don't hear very much about it here. And we know the DOE is working on it because you can talk to some of those people who are retired. So we have some ideas about this. So in any case, tomorrow we'll get in part 2, and I'm going to show you a little more why this actually interacts with other types of particles, dark matter, and these other really strange effects we get around paranormal encounters, which we often get around Bigfoot. Now, I'm not saying Bigfoot doesn't exist like we do as a flesh and blood creature too, but they seem to have this resonant effect, whether it's, and we're going to get into the physics of this tomorrow, through the electrostatic charges, which we saw around crop circles, but that could be coming not from wheat, but from the fine hair that they have all over their bodies, which is a source of electrostatic charge. Charges creates charge clusters, ball lightning. You see where we're going with this? There's another way you can create it. It's with cavitation, sound. Very coherent. We were talking about coherency before. Coherent sound can create the equivalent of a sound laser. And you've all heard stories, Don Monroe's here, of people that said the Sasquatch howl growl was the loudest thing they ever heard in their life, but someone 100 feet away at the campsite didn't hear anything. It was like they got blasted with a very focused beam of energy. To me, that's what it sounds like. People have often suggested that this is infrasound, but infrasound isn't really focused like that, just like a lot of sounds just propagate around. But with Sasquatch sounds, they seemed focused like a laser, which would be something like a Sazer, a sound laser. And that is completely coming out of all this cold fusion LENR research into cavitation. When you use ultrasonic vibrations in water or other type of sound, you can create ionic acoustic waves and very focused types of energy. And I think we see some evidence in the types of sounds we get around Sasquatch. Not only are they incredibly loud, they often seem incredibly focused, based on my research. So I'm happy to hear your views on it too. So I think when we look at some of these properties, we can, just to conclude for right now, is that Sasquatch seems to have adapted natural properties of nature that the cold fusion LENR community rediscovered. But maybe the Sasquatch never forgot how to do this. Somehow we all, humans, forgot how to do this, and we're reinventing this through electronic technology, but they know how to interact with energy and matter around them to create coherency. And coherency is really the name of the game here. When you create coherent matter, like I talked about in Paranormal Bigfoot, once you create coherent matter, it's a whole different ballgame of what you're capable of doing. You have teleportation, cloaking, invisibility, ability to harness huge amounts of energy very quickly, and a kind of a fluidity. Another state of matter that doesn't completely couple into our reality. And there's more. it changes the fundamental physics constants that affect the speed of light, permittivity, permeability, once you create coherent matter. And once the permittivity and permeability are changing, you're going to get time loss. You're going to get those things that Carter Bouchard talks about in his book, Sasquatch Evidence of Enigma, volumes 1 through 3, of people losing time, the strangest encounters. I mean, you all know what this is about because you've all experienced this or talked to people who experienced this or at least read about it, where Biggie is around and then weird things start happening. Okay, that would happen around anything that could affect these fundamental electrical and magnetic constants. So we're actually talking about something that's really critically important and has a lot of potential applications that we're just, really scratching the surface of. But what I'm suggesting to you is that there are life forms out here around us, even right now, that can do this, but they just choose to remain hidden a lot of the time. It doesn't mean they can't have a flesh and blood presentation, but they can have other forms that we call quantum or something. But I guess what I'm saying to you is it's not weird, it just comes out of all this science. Okay. So thanks for listening. I'm happy to answer questions, talk to you tomorrow. My booth is over there if you want to talk. So thanks very much, and we'll see you later.
No probing questions here about that deep dive?
Yes. Prove me wrong.
Yeah. Well, better Simeon to say it than myself. Simeon's booth, by the way, is over here. If you want to consult AI and ask Simeon some questions, you can do that over here at the booth. It's an amazing world we live in. I think a lot of it's classified and ever so more becoming public information here just due to the fact that we have streamlined information at the palm of our hands. So let's make it happen as a group. The other thing that's going to happen here is we're going to take a little extended break. I know that the taco wagon ran out of food. That's an unfortunate thing. But this would be your chance, if you wanted to run to town, grab a snack, come back, or just hang out here. I don't know if you're camping and you have a cooler with you, you have some snacks. Around 7:45, psychic medium 1 million plus and current star of George Norrie's Gaia Network TV show, Tara Harris, will be joining us here probably around 7:45. And she's a local, Cresswell in fact. She's got a name for the phenomenon. She calls them the Aeolian. And why does she call them that? Well, she's going to tell you that. It's an incredible Bigfoot story, unlike probably one you've ever heard before. I can vouch for her abilities to do what she does, and you can experience it. She'll talk to you about how she's doing private consult readings over here in the woods. That's your chance to talk to Tara one-on-one. And so we'll meet you back here. Let's say, let's give you an hour break. I think it's 8 o'clock. Let's take an hour break. So we'll see you back here at 8 o'clock, sharp, ready to go. And don't forget the beer garden and the vendors and everybody else that's working hard. Thank you.
Thanks, Joseph.